lots of different types of communities in growing their business ecosystems, especially small businesses. In the background is Molly, who supports all of our endeavors by interrupting everything for pets constantly. As you can see, she's never gotten any attention or love in her whole doggo life. And today we have with us Cami Collins, who works for the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and I will let her give a little bit of an overview of her position.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me. So I work, yes, for the state of Colorado. The Office of Economic Development and International Trade is an agency that is tasked with really beginning to end all things economic development. Within our organization, we have 12 different divisions, where probably one of our most well-known divisions is the Colorado Tourism Office. So a lot of our areas around the state have a healthy tourism economy. And so the Colorado Tourism Office has programs and staff and technical assistance to support those communities and those tourism-based businesses. So we also have the Outdoor Recreation Office. Similarly, that division really helps communities build out their outdoor recreation economy and ecosystem. My particular division, I'm in the Rural Opportunity Office, which is a very cool and unique office, if I do say so myself. It's one of, not a lot of states have moved this way. The Rural Opportunity Office was actually statutorily created, and it was created by rural legislators who recognize that the way economic development happens in a metro area or an urban area is not the way it happens in a rural area. And so our office was created to put boots on the ground people in rural communities to support rural communities in their economic development goals. We are statutorily required to live in a rural community that we serve. So I live in Delta and I serve the Western Slope communities. We're the only team who is not Denver based. In my role specifically, my role is really to understand and work with the communities in my service territory, figure out what their economic development or growth goals are, or priorities, or their challenges, or their roadblocks. And my job is really to serve as a thought partner, connect to resources, sharing best practices. So there's some really amazing, cool stuff going on in rural Colorado, and how can I help connect the dots so that, in rural, we have to do more with less. So how can I help support you through strategic planning, through thought partnering, through access to our programs to really help build healthy, resilient rural communities where people want to live?
Yeah, so we hear a lot about kind of this rural urban divide, right, in economic development, but also in general conversation. Molly, stop. She's been very needy recently. This is a new adventure with us. But we hear a lot about this rural urban divide. And in terms of Colorado, we're kind of an odd state, I think, in that we have multiple metro areas, but they're all kind of in a line. So for anybody not from Colorado, about 80% of the population lives within 10 miles of I-25, which runs up the middle of the state along the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains. And so that means only 20% of the state lives, 20% of the population lives in the entire rest of the state. So when we think about a statewide office like OEDIT, how does that show up in terms of that broader statewide planning? But then how does your role really connect some of that statewide stuff to the other 20% that doesn't live near Denver?
Yeah, so just adding on a little bit to that before I answer your question. So 80% of our population is along that corridor, and 80% of our funding, our dollars, our tax dollars. And so, but the flip side is the 20% of the population is also producing the majority of the stuff, the ag, the energy, all of those services that the more metro areas need. So what does it look like? Just really practically, we do a tremendous amount of traveling. Like no government employee has a great budget, but we have a very healthy travel budget. We have to travel. In rural communities, people still like doing business face to face. There's still a huge component of trust building and relationship building that comes from being in person. So I spent some time in Grand County helping with sector partnerships. That's more of like, what is it your community is working on? What can we help with? A very tiny town in Mesa County was working on wayfinding. How can I help you with placemaking? And so we show up. We show up and we listen first, I think is really critical. There's this line in the statute that created our office, and it says the Rural Opportunity Office shall inform the governor's office of policy, which I just love because I feel like I've been given the responsibility to hear from these rural communities, like what is not working, what are your pinch points, and then I have the voice to be able to elevate that up the chain, and try to get change happening that benefits the rural communities specifically. When you talk about planning, and this is like really governmenty, and I get it, but I'm going to dive into it. Our office manages, it's called the CEDS. It's a government acronym, right? Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. It's a strategic plan. Most businesses have business plan. This is the state's business plan for how we're going to support economic development across the state for the next 5 years. The reason I'm so proud of this document is that a CEDS is actually required from the Federal Economic Development Administration for regions. So Delta sits within Region 10. Colorado has 14 different economic development regions within the state, and we have 2 tribal nations. Each of those 16 entities are required by the federal government to have their own 5-year planning process. If they don't have that, they're not eligible for certain pools of funding. The state came in and we were one of the first in the nation, and we got to help on this project. We have our CEDS as the nesting model. So what we did was we read all of those regional CEDS, which is your regional priority. It's Delta people saying, this is how we want to grow. This is what's important to us. If Delta said to us, hey, we really want to work on manufacturing, that was encapsulated within their CEDS. And then the state, we took all of that information and synthesized it into our document. And the goal there really is, how do we get all of the state agencies aligned to support rural priorities? So how do I get CDOT aligned, and the Colorado Energy Office, and the Colorado Department of Ag, and the Colorado Department of Education? How are we all as state partners creating programming that actually makes a difference in rural Colorado? That's what our work is coalescing all of the powers and all of the players that be to really say, hey, this is what rural needs, this is what we need to work on. So the question, right, the answer is we have a planning document that took a lot of work, but it was really intentional work because we worked very hard to hear local voices. We were very strategic that we did not want this top-down approach to how we tell you what to do in your communities. We wanted that community-up approach. We want our communities to say to us, this is what we need. And we heard loud and clear, rural communities need help with infrastructure funding. Rural communities need help with accessing healthcare. All of our rural hospitals are really struggling right now. We need childcare. We need housing, and we don't need apartment housings in rural Colorado. We want single family residences where we can raise a family. So all of those rural priorities came out in this planning document.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Office of Tourism at the beginning, yep. And then you mentioned manufacturing just now. And so one of the things we've seen in rural economics over the last 50, 75 years is the shift away from manufacturing in rural communities. And then the idea that tourism can replace that, right? Where, oh, great, you can bring in tourists to your rural community, they'll come visit. And rural communities are often pretty hesitant for that, partly because tourism is frequently seasonal, but also because hospitality jobs are not equivalent to manufacturing jobs. Correct. And so in your role of that economic development, helping rural communities figure out what makes a good job and how do we have good jobs that are year-round, that are stable, importantly, that where you have businesses that are getting created, but also people who want to work for those businesses. How does all that show up on the workforce side and the job creation side of your work?
Yeah, that's a question with like a very long answer. So a couple things. We've seen a shift in rural economic development that it's no longer really attraction based, right? And we're not really going after outside companies. I mean, some of them are, and that comes down to your rural priority, but it no longer works, right? So you bring in this massive outside company into your community. We hire a lot of jobs, and then that industry goes away, and basically a community, right, it dies. So it is not what we are seeing, it is not the best bang for your buck in economic development in a rural community to work on business attraction. What is most impactful, where you get the most bang for your buck, is investing in entrepreneurship and in the term economic gardening, grow your own, advance what you have. And so rural communities are starting to shift that way, because I think part of that conversation is we are also recognizing the job aspect, right? So what is a good job? Like, listen, traditionally, I should tell you that it's a job, right, that pays over the median wage. That's a primary job that's bringing in outside dollars, right? A primary job is where you're exporting your goods or services and you're bringing money back into your local community. Historically, that's what we consider a good job. And I want to add that I think just like a rural community can determine for itself what their economic development priorities are, I think workers are determining for themselves what a good job is. And I think you're seeing a massive shift in our country and a massive shift in Colorado, because a good job is so personal. So I have an incredibly teeny tiny rural community. They are on a 2-lane highway that literally like winds up the mountain. They have no grocery store. So people in this town have to drive 2.5 hours to the next grocery store. They have a little like convenience store-esque, right, where your ice costs $8 because it takes so long to get your stuff up there. But there's a mom there who works part-time at that convenience store slash grocery store, and her husband has to leave town for work. But that job allows her to bring a little bit of money into the household. It allows her to work around her kids' school schedule. And most importantly, it allows her to have a second job doing some nonprofit work that feeds her soul. So for that woman, having that minimum wage job at a convenience store that's 2.5 hours away from like major civilization, that for her is a good job. And so I think we as economic developers need to be really mindful about the jobs that we're pushing. Kind of the old school mentality is just bring in manufacturing and that's going to be great. Well, I mean, is it? Like, what's that do to your frankly your environment around your community? Do you have the skill set in your community to try and attract the kinds of jobs that you're doing? I think one of the most powerful things I've seen in rural workforce is frankly that kind of the tech, where the tech is coming in. So Fremont County is doing some really incredible work, recognizing that just because you're from a rural community doesn't mean you have less intelligence, right? There's like really incredibly brilliant people in rural communities who are choosing to live in rural communities because they're choosing a lifestyle, they're choosing right access. They're that whole work to life balance is a thing that I think employers need to pay attention to. So I choose to live in a rural community. I could go to Denver and triple my salary, but I don't want to. I want to stay here. And so I'm seeing some very cool work about rural communities recognizing the talent pool that they have already and how do we grow that. And so going back to Fremont County, they're just pouring so much investment into building out their tech ecosystem. They're working with high schools to get more tech education into those kids, because they are working so strategically to say to a rural kid, you don't have to go to Fort Collins. You can have a job right here in Canyon City. That's not the prison. You can create your own kind of job. And I really see in rural that is being made easier with all of the availability of the multitude of tech jobs. There's so much out there coming. And at the state level, the state is putting a tremendous amount of staff time and financial resources into building out our quantum ecosystem. And so there's a lot of intentionality around how do we spread that investment equitably around rural Colorado? And it really is looking at those types of jobs where a kid can graduate from Delta High School and stay in Delta if she wants to and make a living, and not only make a living, but have that good job. And maybe that
Yeah.
means she works 3 days a week.
Right? No, and it's
Yeah.
true. I personally moved to the western slope of Colorado into rural because I was working remotely. Our Career Garage is functionally a remote company. I do a lot of stuff virtually. I also travel a lot. And my partner works remotely. And so we were able to come here with our own jobs, buy a house, and then live in a rural community without worrying about where will a good job come. And one of the soapboxes I stand on a lot is we have this idea in economic development called a primary job creator, which is for anybody not versed in economic development, a primary job creator is somebody who comes in, they create a business, they create a job in an area, and they export skills or products outside. So the money from, they are the people who create jobs where the money that pays for those jobs comes from outside the community. So primary job creators bring money in from outside communities into those communities and then support what's called the secondary job market, which are things like restaurants, coffee shops, those things that the money stays in town, right? So when we talk about the money you spend in a small town at a small business, that money circulates that community. That secondary job creation is what you're talking about with those types of statistics. And I really think that with the advent of so many jobs that are able to be done remotely now, both in the tech sector, but also just across the board. I'm redoing my bathroom right now, and the designer who's working on our bathroom is somewhere else. She has a 970 number. She could be anywhere in the state. All I know is she's not here, right? We are sending her pictures. We're going back and forth. And so she's doing that design work, but virtually. So it is exactly the same type of job. She's just not physically standing in my bathroom. And I think that we can really look at those types of things where you can now have a remote job that's not technically a tech job. And that can really be it can really start to replace some of these primary job single business things because you're dispersing that, right? If one person works for a company that goes under and that person is remote, it doesn't hit the whole community. And this
Exactly.
is one of my soapboxes. And it's kind of one that I get a hit or miss reaction in the economic development world because there is no good way to measure how many remote workers you have in a community. And so, from that economic development side, what are your thoughts on that?
I was like nodding like a bobblehead because I'm like, yes, because I think the fascinating thing for me is I think what you've exactly pinpointed is I think we've taken what is traditionally been considered a secondary job into a primary job. So let's say she lives in Oregon. So she's taking your Delta County money and she's investing it in her Oregon based company, right? So that's all of a sudden become a primary job. She's not just an interior, a remodeler. If she had kept her work in Oregon, right, that would be that secondary job. She's providing a service that meets the needs of the local community. And so I do agree with you. It's kind of that same conversation, like what's a good job and what's a primary versus secondary job. I work with a lot of um, not necessarily economic developers, but more like community members who really fight back on what we call primary job, because when you hear primary job, you think it's the best, the most, right? And so a lot of people in rural communities, they're like, well, our school district is our primary job. It's not. Your school district is one of your larger employers, but they're not bringing in outside money. They're educating people who are already there. And so I think, right, yes, and all of the things we've been talking about, I think all of it is feeding into the types of jobs we attract and what we call a primary and a secondary job. But I would agree with you that we're in this place where we now all of a sudden have the availability to export what have been historically secondary types of activities on a much larger scale. True economic developers really don't also like this argument. Look at the Etsy phenomenon. I bought a Christmas ornament for my daughter from some guy in New York that historically would have been a secondary job, but I spent Colorado money in New York. I had to pay sales tax on that, right? So my local government got my sales tax. But you've just opened up this. I mean, it truly is. It's easier for the everyday entrepreneur to be able to access a global market. It's no longer only meant for like those really high big companies at the top level.
Yeah. So we have, I don't know, 10-ish minutes left in our segment. From your perspective, what do you want people to know about rural communities and economic development? And what are the things that you run into that people are surprised by when you talk about the work that you do?
I need more than 10 minutes, Jesse. Okay, so first of all, economic development, that term in and of itself is incredibly hard for people to understand, especially in a rural community, because what they say is, we don't want to be Boulder, we don't want to be Aspen, we don't want to be Denver, we want to be who we are. Economic development, it doesn't mean explosive growth. It doesn't mean you have to bring in a factory if you don't want it. Economic development means how are you implementing policies to enhance the quality of life? And in rural communities, a lot more goes into it. A lot more community building has to go into that. Placemaking, the importance of a community park where you host events, like those are critical elements in rural economic development. So what I want to say is thinking through that every community, it is 100% necessary to have some type of economic development, because if you do nothing, it's not even status quo. It's like we are choosing not even to improve. Um, I had a conversation, an older gentleman, and he actually had this conversation with me. He's like, we don't need growth. We're fine the way we are. And I was able to flip the script with him. And I was like, talk to me about your family. Old ranch guy, right? They couldn't make money. Kids went off to like get some tech job at like CU Boulder, didn't come back. And what he said to me was, I really wish my grandkids could visit more often. And I said, wouldn't it be really cool if your grandkids could live here? And he's like, yeah, we'd kill for that. And I said, they don't have jobs here. I said, that's why they had to go to Boulder, because they don't have jobs here. Economic development is building quality of life. Look at the Flint, Michigan situation. If we had just invested in water infrastructure, your quality of life in Flint, Michigan would have been better. So it's about investing in the community that you want. If you want your high school kids to stay here after high school and you don't want to have that brain bleed, invest in programs to keep them here. That is what economic development is, especially in a rural community. You had like a 3-part question. What else did you ask?
What are people surprised by when you say this is what I do and you're out and about in the world, particularly most people don't live in rural communities, they live in urban areas. And so when you say this is what I do, what are people surprised by?
Actually, people are surprised that the state took the initiative to even create this type of role. I went to a conference it was all rural economic developers across the nation. And there were people who have been doing this work a lot longer than I have. And they're like, holy cow, look what Colorado did. So actually, Colorado is kind of on the forefront of like recognizing that rural is important, critically important, that you have to stand up programs and support. And so there's a lot of surprise around a state agency that is Denver based, seeing the necessity of investing in rural. I think people are also, especially my metro or more urban partners, I think people are consistently surprised about the breadth of what it takes to do economic development. So let's look at a rural partner. You have an economic development organization who has 2 people who specialize in only attraction, and you have 2 people who specialize only in financing mechanisms, and you have 1 guy who specializes only in real estate transactions. In a rural community, you have 1 woman and she does it all. She literally has to know marketing, attraction, retention, placemaking, economic guard. She has to know all the things. And so you have to do more with less in rural communities. And you have some incredibly brilliant people. They really, right, like just love their communities and they invest everything that they have into those communities. Because they have to do it all. And I think that's the surprising thing, is like the sheer amount of work that it takes. And economic development is not a job that you can see success in a week. Like, we as economic developers, if we can get a project done in 6 years, holy cow, like that's success. There's in our local community, I was just reading our newspaper, there's a workforce housing development that has been going on for 2 years. These projects take time because they impact the community in so many different ways. And we as economic developers have to do our due diligence and make sure that we're creating programs or policies or housing developments that the community wants. And there's a ton of relationship building and trust building that goes into economic development. I also think that surprises people, that it's I'm not a business. I can't just say I'm going to write a check and make it happen. I have to have relationships. I have to have positive working relationships with the entire community in order to see success. And success in economic development is truly community success. Like you can't just say, oh, cool, look what Jesse did, or cool, look what Cami did, because it's actually not our work. It is truly holistically whole community getting together to make it happen to better their communities.
Yeah, I think that community point is huge. So yesterday I was teaching a workshop on diversifying your revenue to a group of business owners who were a part of a values-based business organization. And so they were all in there because they wanted to be creating good jobs. They were concerned about the environment. They wanted to be good businesses. And so when we're talking about diversifying your revenue, I was like, great, you're thinking about these new revenue streams. Who can you ask for help? What are the parts of this that as you think about this, what don't you know? What do you need help with? What do you just dislike doing? Where are the places you can ask for help? And everybody was really surprised that this part of growing your business, an essential part of that is who is going to help you. And it always surprises me when I get that reaction because that feels so integral to business ecosystem building, to business relationships, to how you grow a business, to how you grow a community of nobody starts a business because they want a job that's just okay, that pays them an okay wage. You start a business because you want to make change in your community. You want to make a living job. You want to contribute something, and you're not getting that job, that need met in the job market. And I think that piece of who is helping you and who do you want to be working with is so huge in every area of economic development. And one of the things I'm most excited for in this change as millennials and as Gen Z really starts to come into the workforce is this focus on collaboration, not competition, right?
Yes.
It is more and more a push and more a see, and something I'm so excited about it all the time.
Yep.
Just totally. And I go out into rural communities and I am delighted by the things that I see. I literally started this YouTube channel specifically so I could talk more about the cool things that are going on that just are hyper local. And how do we learn from these things and how do we talk about it? So yeah, so if people want to know more about the work that you're doing or that OEDIT is doing or the Rural Opportunity Office, where do they find you?
So OEDIT, OEDIT, just if you just Google that, you'll pop up. Sometimes I joke, Jess, that half of my job is helping people navigate our website and our resources because same, like we have 130 different programs that can support communities and businesses. So really like happy to share contact, however that is. My job is really to understand what you guys are working on and connect you to resources. So our doors are always open, email, text, call, and we just get you to the right place that you need to be. But I would echo what you said. There's so much support out there. There's tax credit programs and there's technical assistance. There's, oh my God, so much out there to support a business. You're in business because you're good at the thing, right? You're good at the interior designer, you're good at the photography. Not everybody's great at business. There's so many resources out there, and my job, I get paid to help you figure that stuff out, and I would love to do that for you.
So yeah, I personally met Cami when I came to rural Colorado, and Cami is my personal rural economic development officer. And I said, who do I need to be talking to around here about things? And somebody said, you need to be talking to Cami. And that has been a delightful relationship. And I also have sent a lot of people your way to say, okay, you need to be talking to Cami about this. Cami is going to help you with some of these things. And so if you're in Colorado, talk to your OEDIT people. They try really hard to help.
We do.
And they're great. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up?
Last thoughts, just you're right. Rural is doing some really cool, incredible programs. And I think Rural really embodies that entrepreneurial spirit. Like there's cool things to be done, there's cool things happening, and just reach out and know those other cool things, and let's bring some best practices to your community.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, next week on What's Going On, this happens every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time because I live in Colorado and that's the time zone that I live in, despite the fact that it never shows up on anything ever. It's always Eastern, Central, and Pacific, but we do exist. Next week, I will actually be in Denver for the Associated Landscaping Contractors Conference, ProGreen, which is a green industry conference. So I'm not certain what I will be talking about because I'm going to try to snag somebody while I'm there. I pretty deliberately did not put a guest for while I was going to be in Denver. And so we'll see who I end up talking to about expos and conferences and why they matter and how they can help your business. So tune in next week if you're curious about that. Otherwise, um, thanks for coming on the show today, Cami,
You're very
and
welcome.
being
Thanks for
my
having me.
third ever guest.
Thank you for having me.
Oh God, one day I'm gonna learn how to stop streaming quickly.